Space Hulk Deathwing is frustrating. No, not because of its brain-dead ally AI or the delays for the enhanced edition, and it's not really due to the connectivity problems with the multiplayer or the fact that the new class released with it completely overshadows one of the old ones. No, I think that the reason that Space Hulk Deathwing really began to rub me in the wrong way was that it falls just short of being something really special. Let's go ahead and break it down and examine the whys and the hows in this week's Cuinn Critiques. The first thing we need to look at when examining Space Hulk Deathwing is the context in which it was made, the crucible in which it was forged, and the hands of those who did the forging. Deathwing was made by Strummon, a smaller French studio, who's most famous, or perhaps now infamous, for their last game, I Divine Cybermancy, an FPS RPG which wears its creator's influences on its sleeve. The inspiration here is self-evident. However, this was an independent game, with its own setting, lore, and story. A story which for many was the nonsensical ramblings of a few mad or perhaps drunk Frenchmen. That game was made in a later version of the Source engine, and was aged before it was even released. On top of this, it featured a myriad of complex systems, from hacking brains to psychic powers and far beyond. For many, it was way too much too quickly, and while the game remains a cult classic, it was never popularly received by a wide audience. Even those who were interested and tried to get into it found it way too complex and explained way too poorly. However, this complexity revealed the inexhaustible passions and efforts of its creators. Then, a very small team of friends dedicated to the creation and release of their game. It's this same passion and dedication combined with a love for the 40k universe that led to the development of Space Hulk Deathwing. This time Strummon was working on an actual licensed title, not in some aging hand-me-down Valve engine, but in Unreal 4. It seemed that the stars had finally aligned for the 40k fanbase, who often referred to the 40k curse, suggesting that any, if not all, games released under the license played badly or didn't honor the setting, a setting whose fans are very passionate, often passionate about even the smallest details. Strummon devs were known fans of the setting, had experience in the FPS genre with their work on I, and were now working in one of the newest and most flexible game engines available. Fans were hopeful, and looking forward finally to the release of a sister title to the Warhammer Fantasy horde-based co-op shooter. A game whose sequel had just released to quite a lot of critical praise. It was finally 40k's turn to step into the sunlight, and if the images and trailers being released were any indication, it was going to be worrying about skin cancer before angry or disappointed fans. And it was these visuals that really sold me and many others on the game. Even after putting many hours into the game after release, I'm still taken aback by the details present in both the massive arching cathedrals, once glorious monuments to mankind's greatness, now overtaken and desecrated by the black tide of the Tyranids, to the smallest, most obscure places like the sight of a gun or the lip of your armor, to even the holy CVS receipts, which in almost any other title would bear no legible script, which here are written in plain English. Many of these things, literally no one would notice unless specifically looking for them, and that's where the charm is. It's how you know this was a passion project for Strummon, not just some money grab or cash in that they finally got to put on a licensed game. Moreover, it's not just the visuals that are captured with staggering clarity here, but also the atmosphere in general. The music, a low droning, often barely audible over the rest of the soundscape, a cacophony of heavy armor-clad footfalls, the creaks and groans of the Titanic ships through whose rotting and decaying intestines you now crawl, as well as the far-off skittering of distant aliens awaiting the perfect moment to strike. Adding to this sense of unease is lighting work that is meant to both disorient and obfuscate as much as it is to illuminate and reveal. Even the blindingly bright flash of your own gun's muzzle can cause you to lose sight of your quarry, leaving only the hit markers of the UI to confirm your correct course of fire. This feature was actually the cause of distress to many when initially playing, including myself, as the flashing would, and did in my case, cause some sense of nausea. Luckily for those sensitive to such things, Strumon did patch the game to allow you to scale the muzzle flash. All of this combined together creates a real sense of the environment, one that is both abandoned and occupied with hostile forces. A place lost to time. It seems less the bowels of great spacefaring warships and more akin to the dungeons of the fantasy genre. A tomb to great warriors, a holy site, forgotten by all and infested with the evils it once was dedicated to fighting, and a vault of the lost and unknown treasures of the past, which I suppose it literally is. As within the levels of the game, there are hidden relics of the past. These are holy artifacts owned by legendary heroes and used to forge countless tales. To find these is mostly an optional objective, but one which rewards you with bonus points upon the completion of each level, as well as both a description of the item and a representation of the item on a digital model of your character within the single player. The levels themselves are sprawling labyrinths of twisting corridors and massive caverns through which you must traverse to complete the level's objectives. These are generally related to a story which has had some time put into it, but that fails to go far enough to truly intrigue or even impress. So really, by this time, I guess you're saying that this is a bog standard co-op horde shooter then, set apart only by its impressive visuals and atmosphere. Well, that's not really the case. There's also the gunplay. Gunplay that is unique within the genre. The scale of the game is what makes it different. The bulk, and I do mean bulk, of the weaponry available here are massive cannons with concussive sound, which blow limbs and even heads off the rampaging gene stealer hordes. Reload times on these beasts tend to be lengthy and leave you very vulnerable. This is when you have to rely on either your teammates or your melee weapons, which leads to the opposite side of the coin. The melee combat? Well, it's disappointing to say the least. And perhaps that's because it's being unfairly compared to the incredibly visceral, impactful melee combat featured in its sister game. But here, things are just, well, the animations are stilted and awkward and slow. Slow to the point of sometimes being frustrating when you're trying to frantically stave off your imminent demise as you reload your handheld rocket-powered hand cannon. And despite the impact and kinetic feeling of the range combat, the melee combat lacks any sort of real feedback. Most enemies just kind of fall over limp or explode into pieces. So overall, I'd have to say that Space Hulk Deathwing is actually a worthwhile game to pick up and play. It's probably worth the asking price of $40. However, that comes with the caveat of knowing that your $40 here isn't going as far as it would in its sister game. It's not providing you the same complete experience or nearly as much content. Instead, it's providing you with a very different experience, one that I've never really seen explored in games. And yes, while it is aggravating how close this game truly came to being something I'd call great, it's still an experience worth having. Thanks again, and see you next week.